There's a moment, you felt it, even if you never named it, when someone walks into a room and something shifts. Not their clothes, not their face. Something in the air around them changes the second they open their mouth, and every head turns, not out of politeness, but out of something older and more involuntary than that. Most men spend their whole lives chasing that moment and never understanding what creates it. It isn't looks, it isn't money, it isn't even confidence, at least not the kind you fake in front of a mirror. It's something subtler, almost architectural. The way a voice rises and then drops. The pause that arrives exactly where you didn't expect it. The slight slowing of syllables when the room needs to feel weight. These aren't tricks. They're triggers, hardwired into the human nervous system long before language had grammar or poetry had meters. Your auditory cortex processes them before your rational mind even wakes up, and by the time you've decided how to feel, your body has already decided for you. That's not poetry. That's neuroscience. The ancients didn't have brain scans, but they understood this in their bones. Cicero didn't just argue, he orchestrated. Caesar didn't merely declare, he timed his declarations like a man who understood that silence, strategically placed, is louder than any sentence. And Cleopatra, whose story has been filtered through myth until we almost forget she was a real, calculating, enormously intelligent woman, was documented by her contemporaries not simply as beautiful, but as someone whose voice rearranged the room. Her shifts in tone, her melodic precision, the way she could move from warmth to authority within a single breath, that wasn't accident. That was mastery. The brain, it turns out, has a specific reward center, the nucleus accumbens, that activates in response to variations in pitch, tempo, and tone. A measured drop in vocal pitch registers in the listener as dominance, competence, groundedness. A carefully placed rise or a held pause introduces something else entirely. Curiosity, vulnerability, the feeling that something real is about to be revealed. And here's the contradiction that most people miss entirely. Tension is not built through sustained strength. It's built through the alternation of power and restraint. Nietzsche circled this idea his whole life. The way real authority is more intoxicating precisely when it pauses, when it softens, when it lets itself be momentarily uncertain. The voice is where that paradox lives. But here's what makes this more than philosophy. The listener isn't passive. Their mind is running, constantly, like a prediction engine. They're pattern reading, anticipating, projecting. And when your voice does exactly what they expect, they stop listening. Not consciously. They're still nodding, still looking at you, but somewhere in the processing, they've already moved on. The shift that keeps them hooked is the one that deviates. Not violently, not randomly, but precisely, in a way that makes the brain lean in because it needs to know what comes next. Robert Greene, in his studies of history's great seducers, identified this as the hinge point of influence. When someone makes you feel like meaning is just about to arrive, you become incapable of looking away. That's not manipulation in the crude sense. That's an appeal to something fundamental about how human consciousness works. We don't process novelty calmly. We lunge at it without realizing we're moving. Now think about what a voice shift actually is, mechanically. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's the slight drop in pitch right before something important. It's the pause that arrives a half second later than expected, the one that makes the next word feel earned. It's the barely perceptible acceleration that creates a sense of urgency without alarm. Casanova, and yes, he was a real person, not just a symbol, worked the salons of Venice and understood, probably instinctively, that fascination lives at the intersection of anticipation and uncertainty. He didn't keep people leaning in through brilliance or beauty alone. He shifted. And in that shift, the room became his. The power of it is counterintuitive. It doesn't come from how big the shift is. It comes from how precisely calibrated it is. Too abrupt, and the listener recoils. You've broken the spell. Too gentle, and it disappears into the noise of ordinary speech. Unregistered. The mastery is in finding the threshold, the exact point where deviation registers without alarming, where the unexpected lands as intrigue rather than confusion. A slight rise in pitch can signal empathy or curiosity. A slow, controlled fall can close a topic with finality that feels almost physical. And pauses. God, pauses are underestimated. A pause doesn't empty the space between words, it fills it. The listener's imagination rushes in, generating tension that no sentence could manufacture. Modern cognitive neuroscience has an explanation for this that would have delighted Aristotle. When the brain's predictive system, anchored largely in the prefrontal cortex, encounters a deviation in expected auditory patterns, it does something involuntary. It focuses. The attention system sharpens, emotional arousal increases. The listener is no longer passive. They've become a participant in the decoding of something that feels significant. This is why some voices persist in memory for days, weeks, even years, while others evaporate the moment the conversation ends. It has almost nothing to do with content and almost everything to do with architecture. The invisible structure of when and how things shifted. Here's where it gets interesting, and where most people working on their communication hit a wall. Voice alone isn't the whole story, not even close. A voice that projects authority while the body quietly collapses into apologetic posture doesn't just fail to impress, it actively confuses. And the human mind, faced with incongruent signals, tends to trust the body over the words. Every time. This isn't a cultural thing, it's neurological. Mirror neurons respond most powerfully to aligned audiovisual cues. When a voice drops into authority and the speaker simultaneously leans forward, controlled, measured, deliberate, the effect isn't additive, it's multiplicative. The body doesn't just accompany the voice, it amplifies it. Cleopatra again, she didn't walk into a room relying on one instrument. Gesture, posture, eye contact, the angle of her head, these moved in precise coordination with her inflections. She was, in the truest sense, a full-body communicator. So was Caesar. So was every person across history who managed to hold power through presence rather than just position. The hand movement that arrives exactly when the pitch drops. The forward lean timed to the pause. The slow turn of the head that lands on a person just as the voice softens. These aren't accidents. They're choreography disguised as naturalness. And the disguise matters enormously. The moment it looks rehearsed, it loses almost all of its power. The goal isn't to appear skilled, it's to appear real. This is the central tension in developing this kind of presence. You're doing something deliberate that must feel effortless. You're practicing spontaneity. Which sounds paradoxical until you realize that every great athlete, every musician you've ever been moved by, every actor who made you forget you were watching a performance, they all got there through repetition so deep it stopped feeling like effort. And then there's the layer that most men instinctively resist because it asks them to do something that feels counterintuitive, maybe even threatening. Introduce vulnerability. Not weakness, not oversharing, not performed sensitivity that everyone can see through from across the room. Real, calibrated, precisely timed vulnerability. The kind that shows you're capable of being moved, of holding something in tension, of not always having the answer locked and loaded. A voice that shifts briefly into something softer, slower, less certain, not as a collapse but as a controlled opening, does something remarkable to the person listening. It disarms them. Not because you've shown weakness, but because you've shown complexity. And complexity is magnetic in a way that uniform confidence never is. Psychologically, this makes perfect sense. A voice that signals strength alone activates admiration and respect. That's fine, but a shift into measured vulnerability activates empathy, curiosity, emotional mirroring. Suddenly, the listener isn't just observing you, they're connecting to you. Nietzsche, of all people, had a version of this insight. The most intoxicating power isn't the kind that never yields. It's the kind that yields strategically, that shows the gap between armor and skin, just long enough to make you wonder what's underneath. Marilyn Monroe built an entire public presence on this. Her voice, the famous breathiness, the tempo, the softness, read as vulnerability, even as her persona radiated an entirely self-possessed confidence. The listener was held in a permanent productive confusion. Is she fragile, or is she in complete control? The answer, of course, was both, and that tension was the whole point. Casanova did it differently, but in the same key, oscillating between playful mischief and sudden sincerity, never letting you be entirely sure which version was real. The mistake people make is thinking vulnerability has to be spontaneous to be genuine. It doesn't. Timing it is not the same as faking it. You're not manufacturing an emotion, you're choosing the moment when an honest emotion is permitted to surface. That's not manipulation. That's emotional intelligence applied with precision, which brings everything to the element that ties all of this together. And that is, in some ways, the hardest to teach. Timing. You can have perfect pitch modulation. You can align your body with every vocal shift like a conductor leading an orchestra. You can calibrate your vulnerability with the precision of a surgeon. And if the timing is off, almost none of it matters. Timing is the difference between a pause that creates magnetic suspense and a pause that just feels like you forgot what you were saying. It's the difference between a drop in pitch that lands with authority and one that arrives so late the moment has already closed. Aristotle understood this. What he was really talking about when he wrote about rhetoric wasn't logic, it was timing. When you speak is as powerful as what you say. The interval between your words is as loaded as the words themselves. Caesar knew this. He would pause before his declarations in the Senate, not to collect his thoughts, but to collect the room. Cleopatra weaponized silence. Casanova let intrigue simmer before delivering a line that, spoken at any other moment, would have been ordinary. The neuroscience of this is almost elegant in its simplicity. Humans are prediction machines. We're always running slightly ahead of the present, anticipating what comes next. A speaker who violates those predictions at precisely the right moment, the brief deceleration before something emotionally significant, the sudden drop in pitch when the room expects continuation, doesn't just get attention. They create a micro-experience of tension and release that feels, from the inside, remarkably close to desire. And the paradox that every master of this eventually confronts. Perfect timing cannot look like timing. It has to feel inevitable, organic, almost accidental, which means it has to be so internalized that it stops being a decision and becomes a reflex. That takes time. It takes watching people's reactions carefully enough to build a real feedback loop. It takes being willing to feel the discomfort of the pause, of not rushing to fill the silence, of letting the weight of a moment settle before moving through it. All of this, the voice shift, the body alignment, the calibrated vulnerability, the precision of timing, converges on a single insight that most men never fully absorb. The voice is not what you say. It's what you make the listener feel while you're saying it. It's the architecture of their attention, the invisible structure that determines whether they remember you for days or forget you before they've reached their car. It's not about volume or eloquence or even intelligence. It's about orchestration, the deliberate, practiced, deeply human ability to move people through sound, rhythm, and silence. History's most magnetic figures weren't simply gifted. They were, in one way or another, students of this. And the thing about studying it, really studying it, not collecting techniques, but developing genuine awareness, is that it changes how you listen, not just how you speak. You start hearing what others are doing. You notice the shifts that hold you and the flatness that lets you go. You become slowly someone who understands the room before the room understands itself. That's not a trick. That's a kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to.